Hi everyone, welcome to our first KidsMatter Early Childhood webinar. You Won't Let Me Be Good, the impacts of educators' interactions on children's behaviour. Thanks for everyone attending today. My name's Amelia Joyce and I'm a Project Officer with KidsMatter Early Childhood. In a moment, I'll show you the outline for today's session. However, before we begin, I'd really like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the different lands that we are all meeting on today. I can see that from the chat that's been going on before the webinar that we're from all over the place. So as a way of acknowledging all the traditional lands that we are meeting on, I'd really like to invite you to maybe pop in the name of the traditional land that you're on in the chat box, where many of you have already found that. So it would be great if you could pop in where you are. I'm actually located on Kaurna country, and so is Sarah, one of the presenters today. As people are doing this, I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Some of you might be closely connected with the KidsMatter initiative. For those of you who haven't been, just give a quick little overview around what KidsMatter Early Childhood is. It's a mental health initiative that's been funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue. It's grown into what it is today through a partnership between Early Childhood Australia, the Australian Psychological Society and Beyond Blue. So if anyone popped in where they're from. Oh wow, we've got lots of places. Excuse me for not pronouncing any of them because I'd hate to say it incorrectly, but thanks people for participating in that. As you can see, I've just popped up the outline for today's session. So we're in the middle of the welcomes and introductions at the moment, and we'll be moving on to behaviour, the KidsMatter view. Then we'll look a little bit at what adults' responses to behaviour can be and what influences them. We'll look at the way relationships play out on that as well. And then we'll look specifically at the KidsMatter framework and what strategies we have within that to help us respond to different behaviours that children have. And then we'll end up with some questions as well. Throughout the session, we will have opportunity for people to put questions in the chat box. So please continue to do that and we'll touch base with some questions and reflections throughout the session. So really what we're looking at as a team, and Judy Kinniston, the KidsMatter General Manager, and South Australia State Facilitator Sarah Richardson, who are presenting today, we're really hoping that this is a beginning conversation about how in our roles we can use a KidsMatter lens to engage with children and support their learning, development and behaviour. Everyone on the KidsMatter team are really excited about continuing this conversation into the future. So we'll be trying to touch base with everyone as much as possible through our blog posts and shared thinking and our contacts that we have with people. Now, as part of today's webinar, we've certainly got the chat box happening, but we're also going to be doing some polls with everyone to gather everyone's thoughts. It's amazing how quickly our spaces for today's webinar filled. We had to close the registrations off very quickly, which took us, we were really quite amazed and surprised by that. So let's take an opportunity now to practice doing an anonymous poll, but also find out a little bit about where everyone is today. So I'm just popping up a poll now. Asking us who is here. So feel free to click on the poll and just show us what your role is in the area that you're working in at the moment. And while we're waiting for that poll to finish, I'll just talk a little bit more about the chat screen down the left. Many of you have found that already. While we're here today, we do really encourage you to use the chat box that's at the bottom left. You can use it to chat to each other. You can use it to reflect on your own practice and the poll results that are coming up. You can use it to ask questions for reflection. And as I mentioned earlier, as the webinar progresses, we'll have a conversation about some that pop up. And we also invite you to provide your opinion about questions or reflections that are asked. Just a quick reminder though, that there are no wrong questions. And if we ask people if they respond to each other's questions with respect, care and empathy. So I might just stop the poll now and let's see what comes up. So we've got quite a cross section of people here by the looks today. We've got educators from daycare and kindergartens. Almost everyone, every section has been represented. So thanks for that, everyone. Just talking a little bit more about looking after ourselves as well before we get started, because today some things might trigger things for people. So let's just listen to a little audio that's been developed by people that are participating in KidsMatter early childhood across the country around looking after ourselves. Bear with me while it starts.
This is a message about taking care of yourself.
We are in this space to have conversations about early childhood and mental health and well-being.
We were all children once, and some of us are parents for children now. So when we yarn about mental health and well-being in early childhood, it can trigger some good memories, it can trigger difficult memories.
We've all had a range of experiences that make us who we are today. As you engage with KidsMatter materials, be aware of feelings that come up for you. If there are difficulties or difficult feelings, make sure that you talk to someone.
It doesn't help to leave it stuck and buried.
Talk it through with a friend, a family member, work colleague or your boss.
It is important sometimes to seek out professional support.
If we're confident in the process of seeking out professional support, we are able to show families this confidence when we support them to find extra help when they need it.
Take care of yourself. Have a yarn with someone who can help you when you experience difficult feelings.
Okay, Amelia, that recording has finished now.
Thanks, everyone. So just keep that in mind as what the messages that were spoken through that as we go through today's session. And I'd like to actually now, with a very warm welcome, hand over to the first person speaking today, Judy Kinniston, the General Manager of KidsMatter Early Childhood from Early Childhood Australia. So she'll be beginning the conversation today that unpacks what behaviour is. Thanks, everyone.
Hi everyone, it's great to see you all here, and certainly getting into the chat when we at the beginning of the session while you're all waiting. I wanted to acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, and I'm very pleased to have everyone respond in our chat line to acknowledge where they are. I want just to start with a little story about where the title of this webinar came from, but it goes back more years than I want to actually acknowledge right now, but it was my very first teaching job, and I was teaching Year 1 in a small Catholic school out in central New South Wales, and I started mid-year, so it was a little bit disruptive with coming in, and I had two boys in my class who were a little challenging for me in my first teaching job, and we had the kindergarten teacher and I swapped classes for an hour every day because I wasn't Catholic, so I couldn't do religion, and so we swapped and did that. So she was coming into my room in the middle of these two boys acting out and providing a challenge for me, and she responded with to them saying, well, you know, if you can't behave now that you're in Year 1, you might have to come back into kindergarten with me. And so while that probably wasn't the outcome that I was looking for, but I did resort next time they were in the room, and they they were very clever because they would start from if one started, then the other one would join in, and they were seated on quite opposite sides of the room, so it always made quite a distraction when they started to be a little disruptive about what they were actually doing. And at one particular time, I did ask one of the boys if did he really want to go back to kindergarten. Probably something I would never do now because I'm way more experienced, know what I'm doing. But as he was standing up on his chair, he turned around and he said to me, "But you won't let me be good." And at the time, I was a bit taken aback by that comment, but on later reflecting, and it has stayed with me all these years in my teaching, is to look all the time at what actually is happening to children and actually look at what my interactions and what I'm doing with those children is actually influencing that behaviour. And as I said, that comment of that I wouldn't let him be good has just stayed with me. But it's been a really good reminder that when I am dealing with challenging behaviours, it's thinking about, because the one thing that I can actually control is what I actually do. What actually happens with with children and what happens with other adults that might be interacting is far harder for me to actually influence, although I can. So what I'm going to actually talk a little bit about now is what is behaviour and what we're actually thinking about here. And of course, behaviour is everything that we actually do and is descriptive of that. But of course, today in this webinar, we're actually going to be looking at what is, behaviour that we actually see is, more worrying and causes some concern. And when we actually think about children's behaviour, we can't do that outside the developmental framework. So we do need to actually look at how old the children or the child is and what should be happening. So for instance, a 10-month-old child who gets quite distressed every time their primary carer, their mum, or their primary carer, the educator in the room, leaves the room, that's quite normal behaviour. But if we've got that happening for a 4-year-old, then obviously that creates some concern for us. So that's the sort of thing that we actually need to keep in mind also when we're looking at what's actually happening for children. So when we're actually looking at behaviour, we have behaviour categorised in two broad categories. So we have externalising behaviour, so that's the angry, impulsive, hyperactive behaviour that happens, and it's the behaviour that we most often see and gets the most attention, I guess, because it is disruptive, and we do usually step in and do that. Then on the other side of that, we have internalising behaviour, and this can be where somebody's quite inhibited, shy, anxious, withdrawn, and this is sometimes a little more difficult to detect and can actually easily get overlooked because we're often focusing on much more of those outward externalising behaviours. So they're the sort of categories that we think about when we're actually talking about how children actually react. And of course, what we have with behaviour is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. It's what we see and what we actually respond to. But in KidsMatter, we've developed an observation tool that helps us think about the behaviour in a much broader sense and looking at beyond just what we see and hear right now. So sitting under that behaviour, we have, what are some of the emotions? What's that child feeling? What are they thinking? And then, of course, the interactions that are associated with that behaviour. What are their thoughts? What are their learnings? What are the social relationships that they've actually got that they're working with? So often when I'm talking with groups and I say, you've got a child who comes in and he's to join a group and he's quite disruptive. If they're in the construction corner, you might knock over something that the children are doing, or just doesn't quite know how to interact and join that group without causing problems. So if I ask people usually, and you can feel free to type in your chat what might be your initial response, but often the initial response is that they would distract the child and take them out of the group, find them something else actually to do. So I'm going to actually come back a little bit and explore what might be sitting underneath that, if that might be our response. But some of you may have other responses that you can put up in that chat box. But if we're actually looking at that child, when he comes into that, or they come into that group, what is it that they're actually really wanting to do? So the outward behaviour is that they come in and looking like they want to be disruptive and join in, but more than likely what they're trying to say is that I actually want to join in this group. I want to be part of this group, but I'm not quite sure how to do it. And the only way I know how to make it known is that, is to get some attention to myself. So what happens then if we actually take the child away from that group and take them away? What is it that the child's actually learned from that? Have we given them any skills to actually know how to join that group? What's going to happen next time that they see another group of children playing where they would like to actually join in? So what we need to be doing is thinking what actually is happening to that child, what it is that they need to know. So rather than removing the child, we might actually think of other things that we might do, which is staying with the child, asking them if they want to join the group, talking to them about what they would like to do, asking the other children how this particular child could join in, and so that we may actually then just transition that child into the group to give them some participation at an acceptable level, and then that way, next time, the child may be able to approach that group of children with some different things. Having just taken them away and finding them something else to do doesn't always actually do that. So again, it is all the time we need to be thinking about what is underneath the actual behaviour that we're seeing. But of course, there are lots of things that will actually influence how we respond at that particular point in time. So I'm going to ask Amelia to put up another poll and get you to think about what are some of the things that influence how you might respond to a child that actually is behaving in a certain way. And just while we've got some of those up, I just want to see whether we've got any comments that or questions.
Hi everyone, I'm back again, I think. From what I can see, Judy, is we've got lots of people commenting about all the different things that they're doing to help support behaviour. Alice has said how modelling and having discussions with the child about their feelings is really important, and spending time with the child rather than giving time out is something that Janelle's mentioned. So I'm putting a few of these through for you to have a look at. Everyone's got some really brilliant ideas, though, that we can come up.
That's really good. And as I said, I've given you an extreme example about what actually might do, but it was just a way of illustrating what it is that we need to actually think about, and not necessarily just to respond to the behaviour that is happening. But of course, there are times where you do have to just react instantly, and that's around where there might be danger to another child or those sorts of things. So we do have to actually have some sort of instant response, but then we also do need to then take time to think about how we might do that, how we might help that child with their self-regulation around how we might be able to calm them.
Yes, and lots of people are saying that they've got more than one option that they'd really like to be able to select. So I've just asked everyone to pop any extra things that they come across as really good responses to chuck it all into the chat section. So that's been really well. Lots of people have been contributing to that as well. Are we ready to close the poll now, Judy?
Yeah, we should have actually given them multiple choices for that one, because there is, no one thing that will actually influence how you are thinking. But you can see there that from the results of those polls that there are, things all the time, and on any given day, other things will take more precedent around what we actually are doing and how we actually respond.
Definitely. So by far the biggest hit that we got in the poll was people's education, knowledge and experience, which was 64%.
And I think that certainly is one of the critical things. And, if I go back to my earlier story, as a, brand new teacher, moving into a classroom that was moving in partway through the year, when I did reflect back on, what I was doing that was actually not assisting, was that I'd allowed a much freer classroom. I'd allowed children to move around. They'd come out used to a much more structured approach. So these two boys didn't quite know how to respond in that sort of environment. So it did actually make me think that, that perhaps I did need to bring in a little bit more structure before I moved into how I really wanted the class to actually operate around their autonomy to move around the classroom and do things. So once I did that, actually, we had a great time in the classroom, and what was happening with those boys diminished. They rarely were disruptive anymore because they actually were able to participate in a way they were sure about what they should have been doing. So that's good. What I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about further as well, just from underpinning what influences behaviour, is in KidsMatter we've used the Brockenbrenner ecological systems model with the child in the centre, but all of these things. So we have the family, the community, the education and care setting that the child actually is in, with the child in the centre, that all influence the behaviour. And then also sitting outside that is the much broader things. But all of these things actually influence children's mental health and well-being, which ultimately influences the behaviour that we actually see. So in today's webinar, of course, we're actually going to be looking really just quite specifically about the educator's role and the influences the educator actually has on the child. So while all of those other things do influence, that's what we're specifically going to be looking at. Many of you will be quite familiar with that model. All of those things influence a child, and they form part of the genetic and biological personality traits of a child, which we call temperament. And children's temperament, of course, also influences how we actually respond and interact with children as well. So we'll know, you will all be able to think of different children that you work with, and we have the outgoing ones, and we respond to those in a different way. We respond to those with a quieter, shyer temperament. We respond to those quite differently. So there's lots of things that actually influence how we actually respond to children, as well as just outward behaviour that's actually occurring. And if we're actually looking at those things, that's where relationships become quite important. So now I'm going to actually hand over to Sarah, who's our South Australian facilitator, and she's going to explore the issues around relationships.
Hi everyone, thanks Judy. It's great to be a part of today's conversation, and really enjoying reading all your ideas on the chat, and looking forward to sharing some more information with you about, I guess, particularly what KidsMatter, the KidsMatter lens or the KidsMatter view and perspective around behaviour. And I just really want to bring it back again to the notion that we built this webinar around was about our role, the educator's role within that. So when we're thinking about relationships, Judy's just been talking about the the model that we use, the Bronfenbrenner model, which is the socio-ecological model, is all about how the relationships around children and how they influence the child. And of course that influences the child's behaviour. We know and we really value relationships, and I think that's a real strength of early childhood, and it certainly is foundation for KidsMatter. There's a lot of evidence to support why relationships are really important. Brain research, attachment theory all tell us that relationships matter a lot, and that children are hardwired to connect. And a lot of the behaviour that we see children doing is driven by this the need to connect with children, for children to connect with us and with each other. So I think it's really important to have spend a moment talking about how and thinking about relationships. Research also says that it's the quality of the relationships that matter, and like Judy was saying before, this is one thing that we can actually do something about, and that we can think about what kind of relationships are we having with children, and some of those aspects of those relationships being respectful, sensitive, responsive, consistent, secure and stable, they're really critical elements of the quality of a relationship that we can have with children. And I think the other thing that's really important about understanding about relationships and their impact on children's behaviour and our role in that is that children learn about relationships for life by being in relationships. So how we do relationships with children, of course, is really critical, but children also learn about relationships by watching and seeing other people relating to each other. So even though we may have a really great relationship with some children, and I'm sure that we all do, we also need to keep in mind about that those children are observing all the relationships we have with other people around us as well. So, I wonder what it's like for a child who we have a really strong relationship with, if they hear us getting really frustrated with another child or talking about particular families, or they can sense the tension in the air if we're not getting along so well with other educators. So I think we have to be really thoughtful and careful and intentional, I guess, about all of our relationships, because they're very influential and can really impact and influence children and their behaviour. So I guess, having said all that, it's just a moment to really stop and really think about what kind of relationships do I currently have, and what kind of what ways could I improve on those relationships that I have with children. So we're going to stop, and we're going to do another poll now too, to kind of explore this notion a bit further, and then we're going to continue on and think about some strategies that the KidsMatter framework offers us. Because sometimes, even though we know that relationships are really critical, that there are things that can get in the way of doing those as well as we really like them to, or in what's in the best interest of the child. So, Amelia, do you want to just pop that poll up?
And while that's going up, Antonio's put up a question about what's the difference between temperament and personality. There isn't really a big difference. We've got lots of personality traits that make up our temperament, and we all know that we can display different parts of those personality traits at different times. So if we're with really familiar people that we know really well, we might be quite outgoing, quite chatty, but when we get in with people that we don't actually know, we might be a bit shyer and quieter. So it's just the various personality traits make up, go towards, our temperament overall.
Yeah. And again, I think that's where relationships are critical, because every relationship is going to have a slightly different way of being together. It's the dance, or being in tune with children is based around who you are, but also who the child is. It looks like we might be having a bit of trouble with that poll, Amelia. Is that what's going on?
Yes, we're just working. Here it is. Just got it sorted out now for everyone about what gets in the way. We've made this one, so this one's not multiple choice either, but again, if you think there's more than one option, please feel free to pop it in the chat box.
Or if you've got other ones.
It's interesting that time pressure is certainly the one that comes up the most there. I mean, I think we all experience that in a busy day. I remember a colleague of mine saying on a particularly busy week, she said, I want to be like you can in the computer or in your document where you just insert another week or another day, the same way you insert another page. But I was a bit worried about that because I thought if you do that, that just creates another lot of work. But yes, time is one of the things that we really struggle with, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely. Carla's just mentioned how time pressures are closely connected to feeling overwhelmed, and really everything can be connected so closely to time pressures as well. And our thoughts can probably go in all different directions. So it's important to look at that interconnectedness between the different barriers as well. And on the positive note, by actually trying to sort out one part of it, we could probably knock out a few other ones as well, help them out.
And that time pressure, I've just sat in a forum all day today about the Productivity Commission, and I guess it's those time pressures that we know if we have highly qualified staff and good child-staff ratios, then our time pressures are reduced. So it just is another reminder how important that actually is.
Time pressures is also about priorities as well, and values and beliefs, and making decisions about what's important and working as a team. So again, they're very connected.
Okay, so I've just stopped the poll, so we'll see what the results are. So yes, time pressures were by far the largest, but as we can see in the chat that's going on, that there are other lots of factors as well.
Yeah, it is interesting that team one is there, and I think particularly around behaviour that really can come into play. I mean, it can for other things too, but when, and that really goes back to who we are, because each of us might be differently impacted or by different behaviour. So one person might see a behaviour as really problematic, and other people might not even notice it, and that's really being, owning our own and understanding our own views about behaviour and why we might think that way, which is why one of the questions in the previous poll was around our values and attitudes and the image of children and childhood and who we are.
Definitely. Okay, so I'll close that one down.
Yep. And we'll move on to the next, which kind of flows really nicely into this next slide, as we're going to start thinking about the KidsMatter lens and what KidsMatter might offer you. And we always say in KidsMatter that a lot of what KidsMatter offers is a reinforcement of what's already happening. A lot of the evidence around what KidsMatter is based on is good practice in early childhood, and a lot of you will already be doing a lot of these things. So it will hopefully be a validation of that, as well as offering you some new perspectives, perhaps. So self-awareness is really critical, and that's that own, really taking stock of who you are, and your own beliefs and values and your strengths and limitations, I guess, and understanding those skills, that skill and knowledge that you have, that all of you talked previously, or a lot of you mentioned in one of the previous polls, as being really influential in how you understand behaviour. And the last point there is about, and that's what I was, I guess, mentioning before, was about those sometimes things that just push a button. And that even though we are always professional, and that's not a question, that we can't, that we do have reactions to things, and we'd really like to highlight that, thinking about reacting rather than responding, the other way around, responding rather than reacting, so that we have that moment where we can really stop and think, about how we're going to respond in this instance. And I guess that brings us to the strategies from KidsMatter. And the first one that we have here really flows on from that is that to take that moment, and it can be just for a second, because as Judy said before, it's really important that we keep all children safe. But if we can just pause and respond rather than react, I think that really is really helpful. So one of the things you might be able to do is just take a deep breath. Maybe do a body scan, like have a really quick feel of your body and where you might be feeling particular things. Are you tense in your shoulders? Have you got a knot in your tummy? Those kind of things that we teach children about, but we sometimes don't do for ourselves. And to, acknowledge and name our own feelings, I guess. What is it? Is it frustration, or is it that we're just, that we're overwhelmed in that moment, or we're really tired, or, what is it that's going on for us? And if we can do this, it only needs to take a moment, then we've got a space to respond based on that rather than reacting to what we're feeling. I think the other thing that we can do if we do give ourselves that moment and that space is that we can really listen to what's happening. And by listening, I don't just mean hearing what's happening, but really seeing the body language, the tone of voice, ours and the children's, and really being really attuned to the whole context. So much is going on in our environments all the time, and it can be really, we won't see everything, or we can't see everything. But if we are attuned much more to listening to more broadly, then maybe we'll be able to respond in a different way. The next thing that we can learn from KidsMatter is the Beatles tool, which Judy talked about earlier. And you will be able to access a copy of this on our website. But I think, Amelia, is that right? We're going to make that available.
Yep, at the end of the session, there will be a document that's available to you all with some recommended URLs, so some links to our website where you can access some of the resources that we think connect really well with today's topic. So we'll pop that up towards the end.
Thanks, Amelia. So if you're having a bit of trouble reading that because it may not be really clear, it's just a bit of an idea about what it might look like. So again, remembering that, using the Beatles tool or any other tool gives you a space to really stop and reflect and think about what we're seeing. And on the Beatles tool, it's not just thinking about what's happening for the child. Of course, that's really important. The first question on the second page of the Beatles tool is, what am I feeling? What are my feelings? And there's a space for us to record our feelings, and I think it's really important that we take that time to reflect on that for ourselves, but then to also begin to be able to talk about that with each other. So it could even be that we might use the Beatles tool to reflect on our own behaviour, our own emotions and our thoughts, the learning, and also our own social relationships, and so use the Beatles tool for ourselves. So that might be something that you might want to be able to have a look at or use, or any other tools that could be useful for you as well. Judy's also talked a little bit about how important it is that children are equipped with the skills that they need to be able to manage their feelings and to be able to engage in behaviour that's going to work for them and for other people. So KidsMatter is built upon the idea of social and emotional skills, and I think it's really important that we are really clear about what our expectations of children's behaviour is, and that we scaffold and support children to move from where they currently are in their social and emotional skills to where they could be. And sometimes I think, particularly around behaviour, we have expectations that are beyond what an individual child might be able to manage. And I think the other thing that we need to perhaps be a little bit more thoughtful about is what are the skills a child needs to be able to do that behaviour really well most of the time, and how are we going to teach that? And that's intentional teaching. So rather than our pedagogical approach being to distract the child or to remove the child, which we often tend to do when it becomes a behaviour that we think is not okay, what is it specifically that child needs to learn and to be able to do, what skills does the child need to have in order to do that well. And I think about, you know, some little 2-year-olds who are waiting at the table for something to eat, and they're banging their plates on the table and they're tipping their water into someone else's plate, or they're trying to grab someone's hat off of their head next door. So for those children, and then we're trying to sing them songs because we're trying to fill up the space because they're having to wait a little bit longer than they normally would, because something's gone wrong with the food coming. You know, the skills that those children might need, they might not be able to yet sit there without doing all those things. So, you know, what are the specific things that they might need? Is it just sitting, or is it being able to sit next to somebody even? And that might be the very next skill that they might need to learn. So there's a whole range of different things. And in component 2, we have some really great tables which break down the social emotional skills and talk about what they might look like for different ages and stages, and that's probably a really good starting point to think about how, you know, what skills might be needed, and also how am I going to teach them? Because I think we're really good at teaching children how to do a puzzle or to climb up a ladder, but I wonder if we're not so sure about how to teach social skills or emotional skills. So it'd be interesting, I can't see the chat while I'm talking to you, but it'd be really interesting if you're putting some ideas in there as we go along too. The last one that I really wanted to just remind everybody else of, particularly when we're talking about our own impact on and influence on children's behaviour, is that we also need to be kind to ourselves and to each other, and we need to be really mindful of what we expect of ourselves and what's possible and what's doable. And so I think it's really important that that's part of our conversation with each other. What is it that we really are expecting from ourselves, not just from the children, but what, you know, how should we be in this space? How is it that we need to be? How is it that we need to be behaving? So that's just a very brief touch or a taste, I guess, of some of the KidsMatter strategies or the strategies from KidsMatter that might be able to assist you or help you think about your own impact on children's behaviour. But we're going to do one last poll now, and again ask you to think about what strategies that you might use. Thanks, Amelia. And as we're doing this, can we do this as a multiple choice, Amelia, or not? Because again,
no. So again, pop it in the chat.
Yeah.
If you use multiple things as well.
You go.
Sorry, one thing that's been coming up while you've been speaking is there's been a bit of a chat around expectations and how we need to be aware of what our expectations are, and also having expectations that are achievable, but also having expectations to help support children to continue achieving as well.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I really want to say about that too is that we do need to have high expectations of children. Children are an amazing capacity, and the early years learning framework states that really clearly. And again, that's about our image of children. And I think sometimes our responses to behaviour are based on the fact that we think children can't do things, and we don't let them do things. So, you know, sometimes our expectations are too high, but sometimes our expectations aren't high enough. That's why we need to talk about it.
Yes, and some other reflections that have come up have been around how important social and emotional learning is, and that it deserves the same attention as what cognitive learning does too. So there's been lots of different conversations around this.
Well, social and emotional learning is learning, not separate from or different to. Well, it's different, but it's still learning, and it's not any less than any other learning.
Yeah.
And in fact, probably for the age group we're looking at, it's fundamental because it influences all other learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to, I know you're still doing the poll, but I just wanted to maybe just clarify. I'm not sure if everybody is clear about what we mean by accessing external support. So that could be something like an inclusion support facilitator or a psychologist or someone outside of your service. Video reflection, it'd be interesting in the chat to see if anybody's actually used video reflection. It can be a bit daunting being on video, but it's a really, really good tool to take yourself out of the moment, and it's amazing what you can see when you're not right in it, and it really does give you an opportunity to get a different perspective. And you know, these days with, I mean, you need to be really clear around your policies of how you record and how you save video, but you know, using video as a conversation starter is very helpful. So be brave and have a go at doing that. Did you want to talk about the peer observation as well, which is kind of follows on from that a bit too?
I think it's peer observation is another quick and easy way, I guess, that you can do something without actually, you know, setting up a video camera or doing that. But sometimes it is just having somebody, you know, observe what's actually happening, because they can see a little bit more around what's there, so they can give you a little bit more insight perhaps around what might have led up to something that the child had. Because often if we've got some really challenging behaviour that we're dealing with, there are triggers that we don't always actually see if they're a bit close to us. So having some of those, somebody stand back and observe and have some input into that can actually help you just the same as we will often observe children. So having one of your peers do that, and I've actually found that really particularly useful in some work that we were actually having, because there was just more that was happening that I wasn't necessarily picking up on. And then we were able to talk that together about how we might actually approach that next time and what we could do about that. So that's a valuable and fairly easy thing to do, although that time does get in that way again in doing that. But it's often worth it because it makes it gives you some insight that you might not have had otherwise.
Yeah, I was thinking we didn't put on there about children and finding out from children what they think, which is probably really important. Children do give us feedback about that all the time. Like Judy's little person, you won't let me be good. That was very good feedback, Judy, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It stayed with me all these years.
Yeah.
And as I'm having a look in the chat as we're talking, and there are people who have been using the video reflection tool, and some people actually use their iPads and then reflect upon the processes in staff meetings. So, so the technology is helping people in lots of respects. So let's just stop the poll.
Yes.
And by far, not by far, but 45% of people use the strategy of talking with a mentor or a colleague, which is great. It's great that people feel that they're supported by people that know them.
Yeah, I think that's especially important when we're talking about ourselves. I think it's easier to talk about children or the families or the program or the environment, and we do all those things really well. I just sometimes, I think we tend not to talk about ourselves in a way that's helpful as much. So having a supportive mentor or colleague is a really great way to do that.
Sorry, Amelia, your sound doesn't seem to be coming through. Are you unmuted?
Sorry everyone, bit of a technical hitch there. We're coming to the end of the session now, so we've got the last 10 minutes to go. So I've popped up a slide at the moment about all the different ways that you can connect with KidsMatter, and we've also got in a document section that I'll pop up shortly around some links that you can get to different resources on our website that relate to today's session. But in the meantime, while I do that, I might just hand over to Judy and Sarah to take some questions. So feel free to pop any questions in the chat box. for people to look at. There's been lots of reflections that have been going on throughout the session, which has been really great. Are there any that have sort of prompted any thoughts from you, Judy or Sarah?
Sorry, just catching up now. There was a question again from Antonio, and it was before about how do you stop yourself once you feel yourself reacting, and I think that is the most difficult thing, because all of those things that we identified before do influence how we do react, and it is about, you know, how tired are we feeling, and, you know, we're already, you know, exhausted. It has been, you know, extremely long day. You know, what do we do? But I think we always have to remember that we can actually, you know, to take that deep breath and to actually stop and then actually take some time. As I said, most times, unless another child is in immediate danger, then we do have a little bit of time to actually think about how we respond and do that. And I guess if you really are doing that, and that's when you actually then need to, you know, where possible, seek help from somebody else. But, you know, just knowing, you know, you start to say something and you know, realize that, you know, am I really saying that? And just being able to stop and take a breath and start again. I think it's okay to do that.
Okay, just got another question that's popped up, and it's gone quite quickly, this chat, and I've just lost it again. So it was something about a 4-year-old. I just saw briefly pop up, but if you guys have got something else to talk about, here it is, found it again. So I'll just put that through to Judy and Sarah to have a look at and reflect on. It's about, at what point would you request intervention for challenging behaviour for a 4-year-old? And I know I would probably look at using the observation chart, the Beatles observation chart, as a starting point to suggest that. But I'll let Sarah and Judy have a little bit more of a chat around that too.
Sarah, do you want to jump into that first?
You know, I think, I don't know if there's a right answer for that. I think I think there's lots of things you can do simultaneously. Sorry, we're talking on the top of each other. You go, Judy.
I was just going to say, I think if that's where we find the Beatles observation tool really good, because if you actually look at some of those things and document what's there and go back and have a look at that, actually gives you some cues about, when is it concerning that you do need to do that. That's where you have a conversation with family and see what's actually happening. You know, do they have similar concerns, or is this something that is only happening when they're at the service? So I think there is no right or wrong answer to that. You have to actually know the child, know where they're up to, think about, as I said before, think about where developmentally you would expect them to be. And then, you know, I guess the best thing to think about, if you've got concerns at all, then I think that's where you go and have that conversation with somebody else. Seek out who your support people are and who's available for you to actually do that, because quite often there are people around who are prepared to have a conversation and can talk you through some of the things that you might want to look at, or give you some strategies that might not need, you know, further intervention. It might just need that, you know, you need some more strategies about how you would actually do that, and to keep an eye on things over time.
Excellent. Thanks, Judy.
I'm just looking at Joanna's question about the child who gets really excited and they dance around and bite somebody.
Yes.
And I think, you know, the behaviours don't always have to, I mean, the biting's probably not a great, it's potentially problematic, but that, you know, lots of children get really excited, and it is about emotional regulation. And I think about the idea of regulating. When babies are really young, we kind of will help them get their feelings back under control, and so we regulate for them. As children get older, we have this, and it gets back to expectations again, we have this expectation that they can get those feelings, any feeling, a big feeling, under control by themselves, and children can't always do that. Actually, not not many people can get big feelings under control by themselves, so they need another person, and that's where their relationships are critical. That they need another person to regulate with them, or mutually regulate. So doing it with, so helping that child to, come down from being so excited, because it's okay to dance, but if it gets to a point where it becomes, over the top, and the child starts biting because they're just beside themselves, then they need somebody to help them with it. And telling them to stop isn't scaffolding or supporting that learning in any way.
Sarah, I think, has just disappeared, but she asked whether is it okay to say sorry for reacting and to tell the child that you're upset. And absolutely, because in order for children to actually understand how they might be feeling, then they need to know that other people feel different things as well, and you need to actually describe how you're feeling so that they can actually understand how they might be feeling as well. So absolutely, it is okay for you to do that. And
I'd go as far as to say that I think it's more important for you to say sorry than to get children to say sorry.
Yes. Totally agree.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put the link to the document in the chat for everyone as we're coming to an end. So hopefully what I've done has worked, because this is my first time doing all this stuff. So let's see if that link came in. Yes, there it is. So if you click on that, that's a PDF of some resources that are on our website that actually relate to today's topic. So we did have one around self-regulation, and the access to the Beatles chart is on there as well. So we really encourage people to have a go at using both sides of that document, because it is a great way to understand our own feelings, but also to really unpack what might be going on. Because something that I was reflecting on, especially during this question time myself, was that so many behaviours that we see children exhibiting, they can be both two extremes. They can be extremely externalising behaviours or very, very internalising ones where children withdraw, but often similar emotions and thoughts can be attached to those behaviours. So it's really good to unpack what's lying underneath that behaviour. Sarah and I, in our chat, she often talks about behaviour being like the tip of an iceberg with so much underneath. So that's something that I hold on to, Sarah, when we have our chats. So I can see that I think we've got 1 minute to go, and we do like to be timely people and stick to our time limits. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming along. Oh, behaviour is like an onion. Yes, that's a really good analogy too. That's just popped up in the chat screen as well. Thanks for that, Selena. I'm not 100% sure, everyone, on whether or not you'll be able to access the comments that come up in the chat on the link that we provide you. I imagine they'll come up in the recording if you do watch that, but we definitely have a copy of those. So keep an eye out on our blog and via our Facebook page, because we will try and share some of these great ideas that people have shared with each other in those sort of in that sort of environment. So are there any final questions or words from Judy or Sarah?
No, I think, but just to, from me, to thank everyone for their participation. Presenting, you don't get to watch all of the comments quite as much as you'd like to, but I'm certainly very pleased that there's been lots of variety and lots of things coming up, and lots of responding to each other, which is really what this was all about. Not necessarily to listen totally to Sarah, myself and Amelia, but to join in a conversation, because it really is about a conversation, and to share some of those things. So providing another avenue to do some of that mentoring and support that you can do, that people said that they found most valuable.
And I can't wait to have conversations with people on Facebook and maybe on Twitter, if that's where people are keen to go. I think we've had some people tweeting tonight, so if you want to get on later on and have a look for the KidsMatter webinar hashtag, that'll be great. And we'll probably have some more conversations in the blog as well, Amelia.
Yes, definitely. Got lots of writing ahead of us. and feel free, like our Share Thinking blog, there is a comment section. So if you do read something and want to have a comment, or you've got a good idea that you can share with the community as well, please feel free to type that in there, or if you are a little bit shy, feel free to email us and we can pop it up there on your behalf. So thanks, everyone.
And if any of you are going to be at Early Childhood Australia's conference next week, all 1,800 people that are actually going to be there, please come and call in and have a chat, because we'll be there with our own space, and we'll look forward to talking and maybe continuing the conversation that we've started with you there as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
And just a reminder, there's an exit survey as you shut down. It'd be really great to get some feedback from you all about, you know, how you think this went. Now, I can see it all coming up in the chat, but we'll do it in a little bit more formal way too. So thanks, everybody.